Hello everyone, welcome back to Venus in Virtue. I hope everyone is doing well. And today I just wanted to do a relaxing, chill VR to Dani Mystic's #MyClassics. So after watching Dani's video, it really got me thinking about what decks would I consider classic Amanda decks. What are the decks that I would hope that people think of me when they see, or even just when they see me using a deck, they're like, oh yeah, that's definitely one that, like, that's an Amanda deck. That's, her all the way. And I kind of wanted to make sure that I do emphasize decks that maybe aren't as popular as others in my tarot library. So not necessarily ones that everyone has seen before, or maybe ones that not a lot of people have, or at least that I haven't seen a ton of people use in relation to other decks that I have in my library or that I've seen on social media and things like that. So kind of getting started, let's see, where do I want to begin? Let's just start with this one. So this is the John Bauer Tarot, and I believe it's by Lo Scarabeo. And this one was actually one that I kind of added to the list right before I started recording. And the reason I did is because this deck I truly made my own. So this deck it has been modified. I have trimmed it of the top and bottom borders, and I've also restructured this deck. This deck does use pre-existing artwork by John Bauer. And I just found that when I was first using the deck, about, I guess, a third of the cards, which I didn't really realize how much it was till I did restructure the deck. But I would do readings and I would look at the image and I'd look at the titles in the borders, and some of them just didn't quite click for me. Some of them, either the artwork or the title made me think of something else, and it wasn't working for me. And I had recently seen a modification video by Dawn Michelle on how she has restructured, I believe, a couple of her decks. I want to say at least one, if not two, maybe more. But so I saw her restructuring video, and it gave me the idea to try to restructure this deck. And I thought, if it works, great. I'll keep the deck, of course. And if it doesn't work, then I'll pass it along, or I'll turn it into an oracle, or something of that sort. But I wanted to give it a shot, So I trimmed it of the borders, and I went in order of the tarot, and I flipped through the images, and I said, okay, what card makes me think of the Fool? What card makes me think of the Magician the most? And some of the cards did have some of the titles, I suppose, did have multiple images that could have worked. And so it just took a lot of, thinking about what does this particular card really mean to me and which image embodies that the most. And of course, sometimes I do still look at an image and say, oh, that used to be this card, but I consider that to be like my intuition talking to me about, oh, what can I draw from its previous meaning and how can I relate that to the meaning that I have given it. So it's just a new way of looking at the tarot, and I really don't see a ton of restructured decks, which of course I completely understand because it's a lengthy process, I mean, it took me multiple hours over a couple days to really kind of get to a point where I was happy with the deck. And yeah, so I love this deck. It really feels magical to me in a very earthy way. Like that deep in the forest, there's trolls, but we still have the human characters. And of course, the color palette is just very earthy, very whimsical, very storybook. And there's really just nothing that I've seen like it. And the fact that I have put so much time and effort into making this deck work for me, it just feels like a classic in my book. So this is the John Bauer Tarot. Oh, and here are the modified backs. Before trimming the borders, the cards are just longer on both ends. So that is my first classic deck. So for my next deck, this is the Mermaid Tarot by Lisa Robertson, art by Julie Dillon. And the reason I consider this to be a classic Amanda deck is, again, I don't see it in a ton of tarot libraries, which is what I like to call my collection. Of course, I do see it around social media, and I wish this deck got more love. I just think it is so well made. I love the art. Some people do think it is Disney-like, which I do see that, but I do not personally think that it takes away from the deck. I think that it's still very mature in some ways, and I just love that within each of the suits, we really do get a sense of their element, even though it's a mermaid deck. So in the sword suit, it's that icy, that sharp, that bitter and cold environment. In the pentacles, we're seeing a lot of greenery and freshwater environments. In the wands, we're seeing that volcanic, that magma, that lava, that passion. And I just think it has been done very well. Oh, you're upside down. Interesting. And this is also one of my favorite cards. The Hierophant is one of the cards that I do particularly pay close attention to when I'm deciding whether or not I am interested in potentially buying a deck. And I just love the sort of spin on this one, that this mermaid is writing her people's history. And the guidebook for this deck is really well written. And I think it offers a lot of heaviness in a digestible way. So like in the Three of Swords here, we really feel their sadness, and it's not three swords stabbing a heart, but we really feel what they're feeling. And in the Devil card, we really feel like we're being trapped, but I mean, the lock is open, it's unlocked, so they could easily get out, but they're distracted by all this gold. And I could go on and on, but I just think that this deck is very well made. And of course, I do have a personal draw to water. I've loved mermaids since I was a child. My career field is related to water and science, and I'm very happy that a mermaid deck exists that does still have those nuances within the suits. And I think it's really great, and I wish it had more love. Sorry, it's the evening time, so I'm trying to make sure that the cards are like in the best lighting for you guys. So I apologize if I have to alter. And then, I mean, this death card is just unlike anything. I definitely think we should have more environmental depictions in cards and environmental subjects overall in tarot. Not to say that this is the only deck that does it, there definitely are others out there. I'm just very passionate that there could always be more. Here are the backs, and I have edged mine in a Crayola turquoise, just for funsies. So this is the Mermaid Tarot, definitely an Amanda classic. Okay. This next deck is going to be no surprise to anyone if you've seen any of my videos or follow me on Instagram. I'm going to try not to blabber on too long about this deck, but this is the Ethereal Visions Illuminated Tarot by Matt Hughes. This is, I don't want to say it's the first edition, but it might be. Not his newest edition. But long story short, this deck is what ultimately got me into my practice. I saw pictures of this deck on Pinterest in early 2018 and fell in love with it. And then we moved because of the military, and I just kind of put my beliefs and what I wanted to get into and study on the back burner for 2.5 years. And then when I did ultimately get into my practice in late 2020, this deck came into my life again. And I also wanted to connect to a deity. I knew she was a moon goddess, but through all my research, all of the names that I was coming across and the descriptions just were not cutting it. And if I can find the card, oh, there she is. So I got this deck before I knew the name of my deity. And I was flipping through this deck when I got it, and I came across the moon card, and I just stopped everything and said, that's her. That is her. I still don't know her name, but this is her. And I've never seen a moon card like this. I mean, she is gorgeous. We have the night sky, the crescent moon. We have fish down here. She was perfect. And with the help of one of my friends, I did find her. It is Adianrod, the Welsh goddess of the moon, of cycles, of death. And she rules the northern lights, she rules the ocean, and this deck will always be special to me for that reason alone. It was also my very first tarot deck. It is what I studied with, this and my Centennial in a Tin. But this one I definitely have that stronger emotional connection to. And I think the art is just gorgeous. The Art Nouveau style is one that I've always been drawn to. And this is just, it's never going anywhere. Yeah, it's great. Sometimes I never know exactly what to say to describe how a deck makes me feel. But I try, and that's okay. Sometimes you don't need to put feelings into words, right? So that is the Ethereal Visions Tarot by Matt Hughes. Okie dokie. I'll save this one for later. Next, let's do this one. So this is another one that I was kind of not super surprised that I added to this list, but one that I maybe wasn't expecting. And that is the Marshmallow Marseille by the Wandering Oracle. This is definitely a new classic to me, but I was thinking how I've been working with the Marseille predominantly in the month of March this month, but I have read with this deck before. And it was one of the first, videos I did was the flip through of this deck. And it just hits all the marks of things that I look for in a Marseille. It checks all the boxes. It is colorful. It is a clear reader. It has taught me a lot. And it's also taught me to not take myself so seriously. I kind of get in my head when it comes to specifically Marseille, but kind of the more historical methods of reading tarot or of divination. And this deck taught me to just have fun with it. that it doesn't have to be so serious all the time. You can have fun. You can be quirky. You can let loose and still get a really good reading. And I really think that, like, if I had to pick one Marseille deck, this would be it. Yeah, I think it's just really great, and it really kind of helped me learn about myself and how I want to read tarot. It taught me that, again, sometimes it's really hard to put into words. I mean, it just taught me to have fun, and it taught me that you can study something and it not be so heavy all the time, and that you can still have fun. And I feel like I'm kind of repeating myself at this point, but I don't know what else to say except this deck is just quirky and still gives me crystal clear readings. It's one that I use directionality in my readings, which I only do that for a certain number of decks. And it's adorable. I mean, look at this. I think the pips are absolutely beautiful. We're getting additional nuances with the flowering and the growth, and again, that just adds to directionality in a reading. Where are there more flowers? Where are there less flowers? Where are they pointing towards? Things like that. And it's not a very rigid art style, which is something that I thought Marseille needed to have. Like, I thought that all Marseille decks should be that, very clean line, restored artwork, which is absolutely beautiful and makes for clear readings. But this deck taught me that it doesn't need to be that. I'm doing the don't know how to put my emotions into my hand gestures, apparently. But this deck just taught me to have fun, and that you can still study a historic deck and have a good time doing it. I guess that's ultimately what I want to say. Sorry, I'm so rambly tonight. It is late in the evening. But yeah. So this is the Marshmallow Marseille by the Wandering Oracle. Here are the beautiful backs. Hello, rainbow. Beautiful. Yeah, if I could pick just one Marseille deck to have, I think this would be it. This would be it for now. I say for now because who knows, I might change my mind. But at this moment in time, this would be it. Okay. And the last tarot deck in my classics is Tarot de Carlotides. Now, this deck I have seen here and there, and it has been picked up by Llewellyn. I don't believe at this moment in time it's available on Llewellyn's website, so if it is not, I do apologize. But I got this deck before it was picked up by Llewellyn, and I was so happy to see that it was picked up by them. Let me open the deck, show you guys the cards. Here are the backs. Beautiful, beautiful. And this is one that I have shown in a good number of my videos on my Instagram. I don't show it a ton. But this deck is just quirky, and it mushes historical and modern and all sorts of cultures, and there's what's the word? Like storybook and fantasy references. So it blends historical and modern, and it blends fantasy and reality. It blends all sorts of cultures. And I really think that that is just magical. Like, it's something that I don't see a ton, and maybe I'm just missing a lot. So if you guys know of any other decks that do blend all sorts of things like that, please let me know down in the comments. I would love to check them out. But for example here, this is a card that I always love to show because it's the card that sold me on this deck. I was watching a flip through, got to this deck, or excuse me, got to this card and was like, yep, I don't need to see the rest. This is it. It's the Four of Swords, Princess and the Pea, and she is holding the pea. So she found it, dug it out, so she's able to get her rest. And I've never seen that interpretation before, and I think it is just so smart. There is like big dresses, big hats, big shoes, there's dragons, there's unicorns, there's flippin' David Bowie, like... Okay, this is just me raving about the deck. Let me get into why it's a classic. This one is also a very clear reader for me. And it's also one that I use directionality with. This is the only, I'd say non-Marseille, non-Pip deck that I do use directionality in a reading. So I find that the exact location of where I place the cards down, it does matter with this deck. Because gazes and like the unicorn horns, like things are always pointing in different directions. And this was probably the first deck that I did that with, because I did that with this deck before I was really diving into Marseille. So this deck is a classic for me because it added a whole nother layer to reading tarot for me. And it's just whimsical, it's beautiful, and again, I wish it got more love. Not to say that it is, you know, receiving any hate or anything. It's not to say that I've seen any of that. I just want more people to know about this deck, and find the beauty in it. That is definitely there. All the knights are riding unicorns, which I think is just so flippin' cool. But this is definitely a classic. It's one that I currently use more for my full moon readings. But it is one that I could easily go to for a daily reading. It's one that I could go to read for others, which has been its strong point lately. I love to use this deck to read for others, which I'm doing a little bit less and less these days, but this deck still reads very clear for me. And it's one that, because it has that sort of whimsical layer to it, I find that I'm really able to dive deep into the meanings. And by that I mean, I've really been getting into journaling my interpretations of my spreads. And I don't really think about the cards much before I start writing. But as soon as I start writing, everything just kind of comes up from within me, and it just makes itself known. And this deck, being so whimsical, really taps into just a whole nother side of me, like not just the childish side, not just the artistic side, but it's just so clear when I'm able to journal with this deck. It adds whole new meanings to the cards that I would have never thought of. But as soon as my pen hits the paper, it just makes itself known. I don't know if that makes sense to anybody. If you know what I mean, let me know down in the comments. And if you journal your spreads to kind of help process them and understand them, let me know. But yeah, I think this deck is just, it's just great. Like, okay, side little tangent, and then I'll be done with this deck. This Chariot card is the only card out of all the decks I own that makes me immediately think of the sign Cancer, like Cancer the crab, which is normally associated with the chariot, but like in my other RWS decks, I don't get that. But when I think about this, I immediately think of Cancer and emotions and like that whole astrological astrology side of the chariot card. But I don't get that with any other of the chariot cards in any of my other decks. I don't know why. I don't know, but I just do. So that's what I mean by this really offers new meanings for the cards. Yeah, I love it a lot, and I wish I would love to see more people using this deck. Okay, so that is all the tarot. I have one oracle, and then I have 2 honorable mentions. So let us get into that. For my oracle deck, there are oracle decks that I do tend to use and put on social media more than the deck that I chose. So you probably see me use Reclaim Oracle a lot. You probably see me use Roots and Wings a lot. And I do absolutely love those decks, without a doubt. Like, they will probably never leave my library. And I love them. However, I mentioned that I wanted to kind of shine a light on decks that I don't really see that much. And this was also my very first Oracle deck, given to me by a dear friend who means a lot to me. And it's a very special deck. And that is the Enchanted Art Oracle by Mimi Pettibone. And this little deck, if I can get out of its little bag, there we go, is just beautiful. Here are the backs. And it has that vintage art style that just, I love. And it's a very positive deck, so I'm not going to sit here and say that it's perfect, like the perfect combination of, light and shadow, if that's what you look for in an oracle. This is a very hug deck. But I think that there is room in the tarot oracle world for decks like this as well. And this deck is one that I go to when I really need a comforting message. And it's also one that I use a lot with other decks that have this sort of older, more vintage art style. One, because they just pair aesthetically. They pair well together. But I also like to use this. It works really well with revival art, which can be very dense and deep and sort of revival art kind of takes me deep within myself, and this kind of brings me back to I really don't know how to explain this, but this deck kind of brings me back, like it grounds me. And again, the art styles go very well together, but this deck is just very comforting and very uplifting. So if I ever do like really difficult shadow work or am just feeling crappy, I like to pull this deck out and I will give it a shuffle, and it just gives me a very uplifting message. And all the angels in the deck do remind me of my grandmother. So I think that's another sort of layer to the comforting aspect of it. It's got a lot of like butterflies, a lot of ladies with wings, and it's just empowering. And it's also got mermaids. Like, it's adorable. How could you not? How could you not? This one does also pair very well with my ethereal visions. I remember doing a flip through side by side of this deck with my ethereal visions and getting a lot of like visual cues that were very similar. So I remember getting, I think it was like the Ace of Swords with this card, and just so like that very vertical visual cue. Like, I think I got the star with this card. So it was a very eerie, like, first tarot deck, first oracle deck side by side, and I was getting a bunch of, what's the word? Not similarities, not correspondences. Can't think of the word right now. Maybe it'll come to me, maybe it won't. But this deck is definitely a classic for me. It's, again, I think it being my very first oracle definitely has something to do with it. But it's also just one that will never leave. This one's cute. Just for the mere fact that it is very comforting and was given to me by a dear, dear friend. And it has very positive messages. And I think everyone could use a little more positivity in their life. So that is the Enchanted Art Oracle by Mimi Pettibone, and you can find this on Etsy. And thank you, Cece, for getting this deck for me. I still cherish it very much. Okay, so that was 5, was it 5? 1, 2, 3, 4, yes, 5 tarot and 1 oracle in my classics. I do have 2 honorable mentions that I think after a bit more time with will definitely become Amanda classic decks. So let's get into those, I suppose. Haha. I'm a poet and I didn't even know it. Okay. First is the Thoth. I'm getting back into this deck. It's been a bumpy road, I suppose we could say. I bought it, was terrified of it, didn't touch it for months, got it again, or opened it up again, trimmed it, started my study, and then I let it go. But now I'm getting back into it. I have been going through the minors and doing a little study. I've been watching some videos. I've also been reading the little white book that comes with this. I've been reading Lady Frida Harris's interpretations of the cards. I do have a book on the way that will also help me study this deck. And it just... How do you describe the Thoth? I think Sylvain really words it best. It has pips with feelings. Just the artwork by Lady Frida Harris is so evocative and so emotional. And I thought for a long time that I needed to be an expert in all of the symbology of the cards before I could read with it. And that's just simply not true. Of course, it does add it just adds to your readings if you do study it, like, of course. But you're also definitely able to pick up this deck and just throw down cards and be able to read. And some people will probably definitely disagree with me on that, but that's okay. I think that's the beauty of tarot, is that we can all read it differently and nobody's wrong. And with the Thoth, it's just so rich of imagery and symbology and esotericism that it's just, it's like it's the perfect deck. I don't really want to throw that word out there, but like, this is pretty darn close. So I'm very excited to really study this deck more. My book should be coming next week, and I just want to go card by card, not necessarily in order, because I do find joy in sort of pulling a card, like, what should I study today? Pulling a card and seeing what the book has to tell me about that card. And just taking my time with this deck, I felt so much pressure in the beginning to know everything before I could use it. And I'm sad because it took months away from this deck that I could have had. But I can't go back in time and change it. All I can do is move forward. And so this deck is one that I want to study, one that I want to just get to know, one that I want to have conversations with and build a relationship with, and just see what happens. So this particular version is the US Games large version, and I have trimmed 3 of the 4 borders. Very soon I do want to trim this bottom border. I kept it on just to kind of help myself familiarize with some of the cards, but that'll soon be going as well. So that is the Thoth. All right, we've got one more in the honorable mentions, and that is the Northern Animal Tarot. So this deck is definitely becoming a fast favorite, and the reason I put it in honorable mentions is because it is still so new to me. I don't want to rush any of my choices, but this deck is just special. It really is. It helps me tap into inner child work, but not necessarily in a specifically shadow work way, right? It just has that childlike storybook energy that can make difficult topics easier to digest. And the characters are just absolutely beautiful. I think it's the perfect blend of animals that have been anthropomorphized. Some decks do it too much, some decks don't do it enough. I mean, some decks are just straight up animal decks, like not saying that all animal decks should be anthropomorphized. I just think some maybe take it too far. I'm babbling. Okay. This deck just reminds me of books that I would read growing up. So maybe it's just that connection, that familiarity to this kind of art style. And I think the colors are just beautiful. Yeah, I mean, really the only reason this didn't make my classics is I just haven't had it very long. It's just wonderful. It's beautiful. And there are additions and changes to this second edition from the first edition that just make it even more special. Just like the vibrancy and color, like I think that's just something that's really wonderful. And I think that both the editions are absolutely gorgeous. And I get animal energy. This is the first tarot deck that really helped me get into animal energy without being a straight up animal deck. And I think I did sort of need that anthropomorphized animal deck to kind of tiptoe into animal deck territory. I'm going to take a drink. And before you ask, yes, that is chocolate milk, because I'm an adult and I make my own rules. But I think this deck is just great. Yeah. So that is the Northern Animal Tarot 2nd edition. And I do keep my extra oracle cards in my bag. I separate them with a guidebook. And when I feel like using one of the spread cards or one of the oracle cards, I just pull those out. But lately I've been really enjoying just getting to know the tarot so far. But I definitely think that this deck could quickly become an Amanda classic. Okay, so that is all the decks that I have to share with you today. I hope you enjoyed the video. Let me know if you have done a VR to this video. I would love to see your response. And let me know down below if you have any of the decks that I mentioned today and what you thought a classic Amanda deck was going to be if it didn't show up in the video. Because I know some of you may have some thoughts. But yeah, thank you guys so much for joining me today. And before you go, please remember, you matter, you are loved, and you can make a difference. Bye, everyone.